Thank you everyone. I work at NTID and my responsibilities are in the ASL lecture series is to support the process of it happening. It has been going on since 1992. We've had Ted Sapala, Patty Ladd, and many other very well-known speakers. And we're honored to have Dr. Peter Hauser. He's an assistant professor here at NTID, and he is also the director of the Deaf Studies Laboratory, an ASL laboratory. And students involved in the laboratory are from 4 different colleges of RIT. They're hearing, they're deaf, they're hard of hearing, and they're all working together to learn how to do research and to study American Sign Language. Dr. Hauser has many specialties. He's a neuropsychologist, he's a cognitive psychologist, he's a clinical psychologist, and a linguist. Since he's come here in the year 2002, he's also done several things. He's won the Eisenhower Award for Excellence in Teaching, the Exemplary Award for use of my courses, and also the Award for Pluralism. He's co-leader of a research group with Gallaudet University for the National Science Foundation in Linguistics and Visual Studies. He's also on the editorial board of several journals, especially ones related to deafness, deaf studies, and education. So we're very honored to have him here today and talk about this topic, about signing in public places. He's not going to come up right away, though. First thing he's going to do is show a movie clip, and then he'll be up on stage. Thank you, and would you please show the movie?
You want to rap, you said, and let it all hang out? This thing about the communication thus separated, your kind from mine. You want to rap, you said? You want to integrate, but you decline to change your line of crap from speech to side. Okay, well, welcome. Good afternoon, everyone. Well, yeah, it's a little past noon, so good afternoon. This is such an exciting moment for all of us to actually have the opportunity to come together, exchange ideas about signing in public spaces, which is an extremely important issue because it's one of the fundamental needs of many deaf and hard of hearing individuals. They rely on open communication. Definitely not my style to talk about doing something and then do nothing about it. We need to find a way, because for many years what has become an issue that we've been talking about, now we need to find a solution and put that solution into action. And we're starting by having the first forum today. And I don't want anyone here to feel impeded by expressing their opinions. because it's the only way that we'll have an opportunity to collect all that important information, which will help us in making a final decision on what we should do about this issue. And we definitely will inform the entire community about our decision and our action plan that will be implemented in the fall. So that's our goal for today. I'm deaf. I expect when I go to work that I'll be able to communicate with everyone.
What nerve! For hearing people to talk in front of me? When I'm signing, you can watch my conversation. You can join it, you can disagree with me, you can learn from it, challenge me, or be open. But for them to talk in front of me, like I'm not even there? Wow. When hearing people talk in front of deaf people, it's like they don't get what it's like to be deaf.
In high school at Maryland School for the Deaf, the faculty and staff there, they signed. They used ASL, but then I came here and the faculty and staff didn't sign very well, and that kind of disappointed me because it meant that the communication level wasn't up to par. Our oppressors are the people that I deal with. My experiences can be summed up in one example. I happened to be walking in the lobby of LBJ, and there were two faculty members who weren't signing. They were talking to each other, and when I approached them, one of them shrugged their shoulders as if it was such a hassle to have to sign for me. That's attitude.
ASL is what we're really talking about here, and the resistance to ASL. You know, we're the minority language here, and we've been oppressed for such a long time, and we want to raise that awareness of oppression by signing. But the people who are complaining the loudest are the people who are always talking and not using ASL. And that continues the oppression. Please help us to lift that oppression off of our language. Stop complaining about having to use the language so that we can become equal. Every one of us needs to sign. It's not a choice for faculty and staff members. You're paid to come here, so that what it is a necessity. You need to sign. I'm in the hallways and I don't see the signing because people seem to be upset to have to do it. Are we a burden to you? Well, are we? Why are you here at NTID in the first place? You make us feel like we're such a burden to you. I mean, that completely takes away from what NTID was established for. I can't imagine. I mean, the pain that I feel for my deaf colleagues, the daily experience of frustration and possible discrimination and lack of communication that they experience every day, as well as lack of access. I'm the complete opposite of a minority. I'm a hearing white male. Often I don't experience oppression or discrimination, but I can't imagine to be in the shoes of my deaf faculty and staff colleagues here and continually experience the type of misunderstanding, lack of information, and lack of access that occurs here. So I want everyone to remember why we're here. When I came here, I planned that I was going to see signing all the time because that's what I expected from this area. I was going to see communication, visual communication happening at all times, and it isn't. Why? I'm so hurt by how this happens. Again and again, faculty, staff members who have an attitude, and I'm tired of seeing that happen. When I was a student here 30 years ago, in my time, the faculty and staff members had such great respect for each other. If you don't want to work here and have to sign, you're just here for money, then leave. Please, just go. Enough is enough. Your experiment here is done. You need to go to another location. There are plenty other colleges that you can work at, but this obviously seems as though it's not a fit for you. A lot of students are telling me what they want to see in the halls is visual communication. They're not paying attention to what faculty and staff members are actually saying. They want to see the signing occur. That's the most important thing of what they want when they're walking in the hallways. Open communication. So what's the problem here? What is your problem specifically? Why so resistant? Obviously, it's all about attitude. Respect, 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 respect.
Respect. I'm sure some of you have seen this poster around campus. You see it in the Cary building, in the NTID building, the LBJ building across campus. And the president's office from NTID made this poster. And just as you've seen in the film, this issue has been around for a long time. This is the title of my talk. And it says, from a deaf scientist's perspective. I'd like to explain why that's there at first. I can't see you. It's pretty dark out there. Most times people get up, oh, thank you, that's much better. Thank you. And explain the behavior of deaf people, right? In deaf education, researchers for the past 100 years have been trying to talk about how and why deaf people learn the way they do, what their reading problems are, and so forth. But there hasn't been a deaf person who stood up and explained hearing behavior. So I thought that it might be a little odd, and that's why I said from a deaf scientist's perspective. Because I'm not going to give you opinions. I'm sharing other people's stories with you, and I will share data with you, and I'll let you develop your own opinions. But I don't know what it's like to be hearing. I can only imagine what it's like to be hearing. I certainly can't know what it's like to be able to stand and talk to one another the way you do. Just as you can't understand what it's like to see the world through deaf eyes. How many of you here are deaf? Oh, wow, quite a few. And how many are hearing? Looks like about 50-50. And how many of you can sign? Oh, a lot of you can. How many can't sign? A few. Okay, wow. Now, this is not a deaf and hearing issue. It's a language issue. Sign language, ASL, and English. So we're going to be discussing this language issue. This week, there's been the Expressions of Diversity Conference, and the focus this year has been what we see on the board here. It's about ethical and honorable behavior. And when I looked at that, I thought, what a perfect way to think about signing in public spaces. Is it an ethical and honorable behavior? Now, this is something for you to decide whether it's ethical and honorable or not. You need to make that decision for yourself. Last Monday, the opening keynote talk for this conference. The conference went on all day, and the Board of Trustees met all day. And they had a workshop that was offered to all of the RIT administrators and chairs. And they were talking about these issues, ethical and honorable behavior. I'd like to talk about that workshop a little bit because there's a lot of relevance to this topic in it. Now, first of all, what is dishonorable behavior? Any behavior that makes one feel less valued as a participating member of RIT is dishonorable behavior. Now think, does that include signing in NTID spaces? Should it include that or not? Now let me make this a little more clear. Now this is about faculty and staff who work for NTID. It's not about everyone. It's not about students being forced to sign, but faculty and staff who work for NTID. I just said it was not a deaf and hearing issue, but actually a language issue. The ASL users and English users, they come in contact with one another. And we are a campus of diversity, and we often will see conflict between groups. So when two groups come in contact, they have to figure out how to work together. And the way they figure out how to work together tells us a lot about human nature and the tendencies of people in general. And what I like to do is analyze human nature, and it's helpful to do this as it relates to language. When babies are born, they can acquire any language, absolutely any language. And soon, within a few months, their ability to acquire any language becomes less. And as they grow, it becomes even less. And by the time they're 18, 20, 40, and 50, it's really difficult to acquire a second language. But for a baby, it isn't at all. A baby will pick up what is available to them in their environment as far as language is concerned. Even if you only know one language, you tend to try to match what's going on in your environment. You know, a mother will talk to her child in motherese, and she'll talk to adults in a very different way. And at work, you might find that you're changing depending on the person who you're interacting with, if you're interacting with another professor, a customer, or whatever. So first I want to talk about auditory languages in general, and then we'll go to visual languages. But let's talk about auditory languages first. Code switching means that one changes from one language to another, uses two languages, and switches back and forth between them. And sometimes people have difficulty deciding which language to use. Code switching is switching between these two languages, and most of the world knows more than one language. The United States is kind of funny. Most of the world knows two or more languages, and they have these problems more often as to how to match the language that's in the environment they're in. Now, there are different ways of code switching, and I'd like to talk about some different examples. Sociolinguists have studied code switching and languages to see what the functions of code switching are. And I have a few examples here. There are many reasons people code switch. First is as a crutch, meaning if you're speaking along in one language and you can't think of a word in that language, you'll put in a word from your second language. So you use it as a crutch. Or if a person's speaking along and they want to ask a question that's off topic of what they're talking about, they're apt to switch into another language, into their other language. Also, code switching is very dependent upon the environment. If a person is here in the United States, they may speak Spanish at home, but when they go to work, they use English. So the environment can determine which language an individual uses. Now, relevant to this topic, do people code switch for political reasons or social reasons? Previous research, not related to signing in public spaces, but relevant to our topic, I can take this previous research and apply it to this topic, even though it isn't directly related to American Sign Language. There was a huge project in Kenya, in Africa. And in Kenya, there are many different languages that are used, and people code switch all the time. And so it's a fertile field for analyzing this particular phenomenon. Myers and Scotton in 1993 came up with a theory that I'll talk about soon. But people don't just code switch. They're often conscious of the fact that they're code switching. They have reasons for code switching. And often the reasons relate to the way that what they're going to say is going to impact the other individual. There may be several impacts that code switching will have on an individual. Now, if the default language or the expected language is being used, that's called an unmarked use of language, which means you're using the language that's expected in that particular situation. For example, if a person speaks Spanish at home and comes to work and speaks Spanish, that would be odd. If they come to work and speak English, that's expected, and that would be the unmarked choice. Let me talk about this a little more. I'm going to go back and forth here a bit. I'm going to teach you a little bit here. We'll talk about this part first. This is from Nairobi, which is in Kenya. And it was from IBM headquarters. There was a guard at the front door, and he stood there all day, and he was a Kenyan. And he was just welcoming people into the building. And he would identify people just by looking at them and figure out which language to use with them. The people of power in Nairobi are white Europeans, and they use English. So if a white individual approached, he would use English with them. And the reason he would, because that's what's expected for that individual, to be friendly and open to them. If a Kenyan came from the community, he would code switch to Swahili. Now, if someone who was Kenyan, but from his particular ethnic group, his culture, then he would switch to a third language, Luya. And so it just depended who approached him as to which language he would use. And he would match the needs of the individual who approached him with his language use. Now, suppose that a community person came in and he used English. That would be snobbish of him. And so let me go back here. Now, if he as an individual is black and the person approaching him is black, and he used English with that individual, who would normally use Swahili, then he would be distancing himself from that individual. And so the language then becomes marked, and marked language tends to separate you from people or distance yourself from individuals. Now, American Sign Language, when is it unmarked? When is it expected? When do you expect to use ASL or sign language? This is a little bit obvious, but if you meet a deaf person, you're expected to sign. In the deaf world, which means if you're at the deaf club or organizations or events sponsored by or with deaf people, and if you're in deaf-friendly signing places or signing spaces. And I'll talk a little bit more about this third one, signing spaces, in a few minutes.
Oscars to present the Oscar for Best Actor by nominating the following actors for Best Performance in a Leading Role. You have honored each one magnificently.
The nominees for Best Actor in a Motion Picture are...
I spoke the names of the actors. The right person got up and got the award, so I must have said something right.
Many people had hoped that she would be a pioneer from our community. That she would sign at the awards, and that would impress the audience.
Just a few days later, there was a magazine, a deaf magazine, that said, offensive. And I was like, what now? I got used to hearing people making comments about me, but now I was getting it from deaf people because I chose to speak.
And we all looked to her for validation, but when she spoke, our hopes were dashed.
No one has yet to talk about the elephant in the room, so I'll say it. Communication is a very hot topic for us as deaf people. Growing up, 90% of us in our families had very limited communication.
This topic of signing in public spaces, not speaking, oh, it's a very sensitive issue. So we need to talk about it. J. Matt Searles mentioned that 90, but it's more like 95% of us have hearing parents. Now, the reason that this is important is that today, on average, a person is identified as deaf at about the age of 18 months old. That's pretty young. It used to be a lot older than that. But it does take a long time from the time a baby is born to identify that they're deaf. And then the parents have been experienced the whole pregnancy where they have really planned ahead and thought and fantasized about what it was going to be like to have their child. And all of a sudden, they find out their child is deaf, and all of those dreams are completely unsubstantiated. And often parents become divorced, or they separate, or they get into lots of arguments because all of their dreams have been shattered. But very often, deaf parents finding out that they have hearing children go through the same thing. And as a child is not paying attention to their parents because they can't hear the parent saying no, no, and the child looks like they're headstrong and not paying attention. So then finally the parent takes the child to the doctor and discovers that the child is just simply deaf. And so this impacts the kinds of schooling that's chosen for the child. Let me see if I can tell this from a hearing perspective, where suddenly the hearing parent is plunged into the process of trying to decide the correct schooling, the correct way of teaching them language, etc. So around the age of 18 months, very often the language process goes through a suspension because the parent now doesn't know how to attach to the child and is going through a lot of turmoil trying to figure out how now to deal with a child who's deaf instead of hearing. And from the first 18 months, they didn't have that input either.
When I was a child, and when my parents spoke, I was completely lost. I would watch their gestures and their body language, but I had no idea what they were saying. I could hardly communicate with them at all. But finally, I learned sign language, and I think that's when my life really began. English is just moving lips. It has no meaning for me. But sign is so visual, it's got emotion. I can communicate for the first time.
Are you all familiar with the dinner table syndrome? Have you heard of that? It's a situation where a deaf child and a hearing family, and they'd sit down at the dinner table and talk about their day. The parents would talk about their likes and dislikes at the job, and maybe the deaf person would have siblings who would talk about what happened to them at school. Whereas the deaf person, that was me and my family, was left out of the conversation. Well, isn't this a repeat of the dinner table syndrome right here at NTID? You're in the hallways, communication is occurring, and the communication is not visual. The conversation may be about the workplace, information that may be relevant to my position, and it's the dinner table syndrome again.
That 95% of hearing parents with deaf children, the deaf child wants to be a belonging member of the family, but they feel disconnected. There's so much conversation going on around them. And this work of art, produced by Susan Dupour, who is a deaf artist, she produced this painting called The Family Dog, because very often the deaf person feels like the left out pet of the family, where all of this information is flowing over their heads and they have no idea what it's about. And then they're addressed in a very simple manner. Do you want to go out and play? And this is the kind of thing that deaf people with hearing parents experience on a daily basis. They do not have communication access at the dinner table or anywhere else in their homes. And this feels unacceptable. So that's the reason it's such a sensitive issue. How many of you who are deaf experience this kind of dinner table syndrome, as we call it? Okay. Self-esteem is how you feel about yourself. We see here an obvious graph. Deaf people who have deaf families, where they're seeing everything that's going on, they can see, oh, mom and dad are talking about the taxes now. Oh, mom is now talking about stress at work. Oh, they're talking about the kind of pressure that their boss is putting on them. For hearing parents with a deaf child, that kind of feedback is missing. This is academic self-esteem, how a deaf student feels about themselves as a person or as a student. And this is showing the change related to the confidence as a student. A person who feels like they're not a complete member of their own family. And this comes from a lack of communication, and this makes a strong psychological impact on deaf kids. And remember, that's 95% of us.
I never really wish I were a hearing person, rarely. When I'm so upset trying to communicate with hearing people, and the only thing I can do is write back and forth. But those are rare occasions.
If my classmates and professors became deaf, completely deaf, and were proficient signers, what I would do is, and this might sound mean, but I would place them in a hearing classroom. And then I'd ask them to pay attention. And then I'd maybe wait for a half an hour and then ask them what they learned. And they would be completely lost. And through that experience, they would know what I went through growing up deaf my entire life. But then an hour later, they would become hearing again. And they would remember what they went through. And of course, I hope they would tell their hearing peers what they went through. Really, that's what I would do, because I can't really explain my experience being deaf. Because it's so deep-rooted, my suffering and everything that I went through. To merely explain it to them would not get the message across. They would really have to experience it themselves. Oftentimes, I wish I could just take away their hearing, just so they know what it feels like to be deaf.
I'm proud of the person that I am. So there's no part of me that wants to become a hearing person. I wish I could listen to music on occasion. But really, I'm proud of being deaf.
I want them to experience the pain of what it's like to be deaf in a hearing environment. And then after they go through all the hard times, they can see the true joys of what it's like to be a part of the deaf community.
Way back in 1980, I can't believe it's almost 30 years ago, signing in public spaces was a big issue. The vice president, who was responsible for NTID, said, come on, faculty, staff, please sign. So a task force was established to investigate this issue. And as you can see here, they were charged to develop a plan to increase the sensitivity of NTID staff to the diverse communication needs of deaf and hard of hearing staff members. Now, this was in 1988.
This is a great institution for deaf people, but we find that there are a lot of people that don't sign. They don't sign with each other in front of deaf people, or if a deaf person happens to be walking down the hallway. At our School for the Deaf, were parents, students, teachers, and deaf teachers complain that teachers are not using sign language appropriately. So the school administration made a decision that all teachers were expected to sign for themselves, no matter where they are, as long as there are deaf people, deaf students, adults, children, parents, or whatever that were in the environment. So I was able to have an opportunity to listen to these experiences and make some decisions about this based on their conversations. And to my amazement, there was some level of resentment from a number of hearing teachers that bothered me. I think that we need to establish an expectation in this environment that would be a positive thing for everyone. We should not violate the rights of people. We should encourage people to be sensitive to the needs of deaf people in this environment. We don't want to make a negative, this a negative experience.
In 1989, the NTID Communication Task Force said,
So in 1992, NTID said, okay, that's enough. We need to incorporate something into our strategic plan. And the decision was that NTID was committed to recognizing, studying, and using English and American Sign Language as the languages of the educational community, with all community members sharing the responsibility for respecting language preferences of students and colleagues. And they also needed to emphasize that language and access to language are fundamental to the acquisition of an education. Last academic year, one deaf graduate student who was an alumni of RIT who had come back to pursue his master's degree, he was looking at the importance of access in deaf education and how important it is for deaf people to look around them and see information flowing around them to be able to learn it and pick it up. But this graduate student noticed that faculty and staff within NTID were all talking with each other and they weren't signing. he'd had it. So he generated these posters and posted them around the building. And that started the renewed conversation, which has led to the communication forums. And the discussion was that still, after all of that time and discussion, people were not signing in public spaces. The NTID Student Congress president at that time, Lizzie Sorkin, led a protest, a silent protest, on the second floor main corridor in LBJ. What they did was they counted the people who were talking rather than signing. So in 2005, these 3 faculty staff members were asked to distribute a survey, and they collected a great deal of data. And from this data, they found some respondents were hard of hearing, others were deaf. This was disseminated to the deaf professional group. Anybody who had a hearing aid, and most of them responded with, I would like people to approach me using sign language, whether they're also speaking or not. About 64% said that sometimes hearing faculty and staff look as if they're burdened by being asked to sign. In the opening movie, we saw people expressing their frustration with that fact. So that's the perception, that many hearing people feel like it's an undue expectation. So 4 communication forums were held in the past academic year. And we saw from last year a number of themes emerge as they were expressed in the point of view of different people. So I selected some examples to show you that some people were in support of open signing in public spaces and others were opposed.
Hearing people feel for myself, when I see deaf students walking along fully engaged in high-speed communication, I don't feel comfortable that I can break in. I mean, if you want to be included, include us too. It's a two-way street, and if you get what you give. I don't feel, with my skill level, that I can understand some people because they're signing so quickly. Do they slow down and sign for me so I can understand them? No.
Visitors or people who can't sign, faculty from the other parts of the Institute, we are showing them an exclusion. We're preventing them from access to communication here. It will not be a friendly environment.
If you're able to sign, this environment will be extremely friendly for students. And they have the right to have a friendly environment. If you're not going to sign, don't attempt to communicate. It's not friendly.
We saw 2 clearly different groups who were having 2 opposite points of view of the same argument. They both wanted a friendly environment. One group wanted to see the sign language and the other group didn't so much. But the majority of people have the power, and the signing group is the minority group. So we can argue how much power they have. This was not produced by me, but rather the students in my lab who are working with me, not only at this university, but others. Have you ever noticed how people, as they approach the microphone, it's really hard to see them signing on some of these film clips. But deaf people don't complain about that. They want an environment that's accessible for the hearing. They don't complain about the microphone. So, it takes some concession from both sides. This isn't really a joke, but my group thought it was funny.
Dialogue started because deaf people who use sign feel uncomfortable here, not that people who don't sign when they get here feel comfortable. I'm not saying that we would want to exclude those people, that's not the point, but it's not, I hear again and again, we need to communicate to all people. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't get complaints from people who don't sign related to faculty and staff sign. I do hear complaints from deaf people who use sign, complaining about those people who work here and get paid by the institute that don't sign or are weak sign.
I don't think we want to exclude oral students. I don't think like that. That's not our intentions. But often people perceive it that way.
I hear oral students, I hear spoken language students. What about the deaf students who grew up in residential schools who sign? Are those students not important for retention anymore? Is that the message that you're leaving us with? I didn't think it was. Well, can we respect diversity?
20% that don't really sign when they come here. I want them to feel comfortable when they come here. I know that there won't be 20% of them not signing when they graduate. Most of our students pick up sign language. There's a few who don't pick up any sign language while they're here.
Oral students with cochlear implants, when I sign CI, that's a cochlear implant. It's like an advanced hearing aid, and it requires surgery. Now, CI, a cochlear implant, is not a language, so it's not really an issue of do we use ASL or do we have cochlear implants. It's not a language. Most of the students, when they graduate, there are only 20% who come without sign, and most of them graduate with sign language. And they picked NTID because of the support services available here, and because they wanted a signing environment. That's why most students have picked NTID. If they didn't, they would have gone somewhere else. In the past, when people had hearing aids, people said, well, that's going to change the culture. And then digital hearing aids come in, and people thought, well, that's going to change deaf culture. And now with cochlear implants, people are saying that's going to change deaf culture. But in fact, it isn't. It has proven not to. There are so many people who are concerned about the oral students who use speech and who use speech reading, but they're not complaining. So, they're a part of the group that wants to see faculty and staff signing. So why are people speaking for them when in fact they're not speaking against what's happening for themselves? Now, this is the most widely heard one.
It's not really specific to anyone else. Having me sign that, perhaps it's tantamount to me yelling it across the hallway so that everyone can hear me when it's not particularly their business. I know I could go someplace private, but that's the issue I have with it.
It's not that we want to know everybody's business, But when we see a conversation and see the play with words and the back and forth, it may be something new for me.
I was waiting for my coffee. And the delivery person had her child with her because school is off this week. So when the delivery person was like carrying everything and she's trying to keep track of her child, she said, "Can you please open the door?" And she said, "I can't wait for Monday." And the window person said, "Well, why?" And she said, "Because school starts again." And I laughed with that because for me it's the same. I've had that stress all week of where is my daughter going to stay and will I get to work on time and all of that. So I laughed and we all made a human connection in that moment. We all laughed together. And I think that's what's missing if we're not providing as much access as possible in the hallways, is that we as faculty and staff together can't make the human connection. So while that weekend conversation may be private, oftentimes how many times do you walk behind somebody and say, "Oh, you went there," or "Oh, wow, that must have been fun," or "I went there last week and it was great," or something. And I think that joining together is not possible if we're not providing access.
It's so interesting how hearing people are so paranoid about private conversations. I think it's funny. But that does not mean that as a deaf person I can never have a private conversation just because I sign? No, that's ridiculous.
I just wanted to warn you, it's almost 1 o'clock. I know some people have to leave for 1 o'clock classes or something. So this goes to 1:30, but some folks had asked me if I could put this talk on DVD, and so that's why you see cameras around. Now, talking about private conversations.
Growing up, I was always told the best way for me to learn was to take things in visually. So if I am walking down the hallway and see a professor speaking, how am I going to learn?
I'm so disheartened. I want to see a professor who actually wants to teach here, not just someone who comes in and is just like, "Oh, I have to sign for you," right?
When I see students come to me saying, my teacher doesn't understand me, that really affects me. They want to be able to communicate with the faculty and staff, not just other deaf people.
Our faculty and staff here really need to learn ASL. It's going to assist in improving the teaching skills that they have already, and it's going to allow dialogue to be more open in the classroom. Can you imagine that?
The hearing staff and faculty at NTID, they say, "Oh, I want to teach deaf people, help them grow to be intelligent." But how can they teach them if they can't even sign? Deaf people come here to be taught in their own language, ASL.
A lot of learning is called incidental learning or peripheral learning. And what that means is that you're picking up information that's happening in the environment around you, at the grocery store or wherever. You just pick up information around you. If people aren't signing, then that incidental learning is not happening at RIT and TID for the deaf students. They can't pick it up. Now this is the last
I
clip.
expect that everyone sign in this building so that when students come here, they feel comfortable and see the communication. That's the way it should be at this store. I would like to have that benefit because I'm an IT major, and IT is all the way over on the other side in building 70. It's extremely rare for me to see a deaf person over there or to see signing over there, except for an interpreter. So when I'm walking in hallways, professors' offices are lined along one side of the hall and classrooms on the other, and I see professors hurrying to classrooms. I don't understand what's going on. I'll see students walk into classrooms, paired up, talking to each other, having conversations. I can't join those conversations. So there's no opportunity to me to converse with a professor. Therefore, it makes sense that if I'm here at NTID, I expect that in a deaf environment, if I see a professor walking around, it'd be nice to be able to participate in their conversation. I'm a cross-registered student.
I'm in the RIT environment all the time. I see people talking all the time about signing. And so I think this should be our safe haven.
I'll go back to some of these topics, but I've gotten a little ahead here. Now, again, this is a language issue, to sign or not to sign, to use English, to use ASL. And this has been going on. This issue has existed for 30 years. Faculty, staff, administration have asked, please sign in open spaces. Now, going back to this concept of marked and unmarked speech. Unmarked is what you expect in a communication environment, and marked is something that you don't expect. So, signing in public spaces is unmarked. It reduces the social distance. It makes people feel closer, and it's more inclusive of hard of hearing and deaf people. It's more, and it also facilitates learning. Now, marked language is where you decide not to sign, and then what happens is it increases social distance. It excludes deaf and hard of hearing individuals from conversations. It's a non-friendly environment for deaf and hard of hearing individuals, and there are fewer opportunities for learning and interaction. Now, Monday, at the opening of this conference, the Board of Trustees had a keynote speaker, Stephen Young. And he was great. He was fabulous. And he talked about micro messages. It's the same thing I'm talking about here. Now, there's also a professor in Georgetown University who talks about the meta message. And so it's the same concept that we're talking about here. When you introduce a person, you say, hey, this is Bill, that's Bob. Now, my sentences are the same, but my intonation and facial expression were quite different. And so that is the meta message, the message behind the message. So if you decide to sign or not to sign, both contain a meta message. Both do. At the moment that you decide not to sign, you are sending a message. Now, I need to give an example. I know I'm behind here, but at the diversity workshop, there were 6 people at my table. 3 of us were deaf and 3 of us were hearing. The 3 hearing people could sign, and so we were all talking with one another through sign language. And what happened was 2 of the hearing people started looking to one another and speaking to one another in English. They weren't signing, and that was all right. It was personal, and there were a lot of hearing people around, and there were just us few deaf people. And so those 2 people started talking to one another. And so one of the hearing people and the other 3 deaf people at the table had a conversation in ASL, and the 2 hearing people were speaking in English. And so we were all signing, and the hearing person then heard something the other 2 were saying, turned to them and said, oh yes, and started talking to them. Now there are 3 of us left there grinning at the table. We were disgusted inside, but we put a smile on our faces. And there we were with the dining room table syndrome all over again. Now, I'd like to show you this demonstration. When you see a red dot, it's a deaf person. When you see a yellow dot, it's a hearing person. And when you see the red halo that pulses, that's a person who's signing. And if it's pulsing in yellow, then that's a person who's speaking. Now just watch this. I'll stop it and explain it on occasion, but watch. Now let me show it again in slow motion. All of these people are hearing and they're all speaking. In comes a deaf person and sees the hearing people talking, kind of hesitates. Oh, it's private, so ignores it, turns around, and one hearing person starts to sign. As they turn, they notice another deaf person coming in. And one of the hearing people notices these deaf people and picks up their hands and starts signing. So the deaf person joins that group where the signer is for a moment. Now that sense of them picking up their hands and starting to sign because a deaf person is present is what gives them that feeling of burden, that they're a burden to the hearing person because they weren't signing previously. Now, this is a signing space. Everyone is signing when they're talking. And so they're all signing, they're all involved in the conversation, or could be. Now, did you notice what happened at the very end? Let me show it again. At the very end, notice what happens. They're all hearing at this point, but they're all signing. There are no deaf people in the room. That's still called a signing space. And the next deaf person who goes in won't see everybody rush to put their hands up. This is a much more friendly space. And this is what campus looks like. So where are the signing spaces? They're around the deaf people. As deaf people move through the environment, the signing space moves with them. And as they leave an area, the people stop signing. So wherever deaf people are at the moment, that's where you see signing spaces. So what is the solution? Who is you? All of us are you. You know, I mean, it doesn't just mean NTID people. All of you can join us in this effort. As Lizzie Sorkin said, the undergraduate deaf students, or hearing students, pardon me, are much more interested in having sign language classes, and there aren't enough sign language classes available. There are a plethora of classes available, say, in Japanese, but there are only 2 available in ASL. This discussion has also been going on for 30 years.
You all see, deaf and hard hearing people are the most skilled when it comes to meeting communication needs of anyone that they come across, with diverse communication needs. When people meet me, especially students, they always assume that I'm hearing because of my years working with hearing people. And so when I tell them I need them to sign, they are so thrilled that they can use whatever communication mode best fits them. They feel that finally they've met someone who they don't have to adjust their style of communication so that that person understands. Outside of academia, they do that on a daily basis. They want to be here in a place where They can find their own identity, their own niche, and not have to worry about meeting communication needs constantly.
So my question to you is, what can we do as a community to get up there? What changes can each of us make?
We need communication, open communication. People forget, so it's important to remind them. The issue really is us constantly having to remind the people who forget to sign. Should we actually take the time out to remind them of the environment? I don't think so. You have to understand that students, faculty, and staff who are all deaf are frustrated. They see faculty members walking in the hall talking to each other, and you know, we can't control your communication output, and we can't be the communication cops. I feel like, what should I do? They're talking. Should I remind them again? I'm like, I'm putting up with it over and over again. Forget it. I'm not going to remind them until I'm fed up.
She reminded me, I didn't feel insulted, I felt like, so I think that in some ways, being the police might be appropriate. I don't think it's okay.
I think that it's okay to be the police. By the way, I'm here. You can let people know that. And if I'm signing to a hearing person and they don't pick up their hands, it makes it much harder for us to continue signing and have a conversation back and forth in sign. So it's okay to say, pick up your hands.
We have a strategic plan with, by 2 years, we want to have all of the faculty and staff at NTID to be at an intermediate level of signing. And if not, your job may be terminated.
I'm sorry. That's what happens when a deaf person edits and a hearing person isn't sitting next to them controlling the audio. Anyway, this poster, it's hard to see. It's the banner is kind of small. And so let me enlarge it for you, because it is kind of tiny. So let me enlarge this banner. It says here, to the best of your ability. We know that people have varying skill levels. But what you can use, please use, as the knowledge of sign language that you have, please use.
Many hearing faculty and staff members some have great attitudes but poor sign skills.
He said, a good attitude is what's important. They may have poor signing skills, but the attitude is what is important. I have one story. I was in building 14, going into my lab, and I noticed the copy room, and looked into the copy room, backed up, and wow, some fellow was there fixing the copy machine, and he was laying on the floor he was from outside of the institution here, and with him was a staff member who was hearing and had just joined the staff like last fall. He had only been here a few months at that time and was taking ASL 1. And he was in that room, just the two of them, somebody from outside and him, and he was signing all the time to this guy that was on the floor. He was talking to him and signing away, awkwardly so, but he was signing. I respect him so much. That is what it's all about, attitude. But if people sign, they'll become proficient. It's possible. Alan Hurwitz talks about in schools for the deaf, people need to be signing all of the time. Well, this was a school for the deaf, the image up here, and in 1985, the signing level was considered, of teachers, was considered not to be sufficient. Only 35% of the individuals who were teaching and on staff met the standards expected of them. And so they put forth an effort And by 1986, people's skills had doubled. And by 1989, they were up to 90%. And 1990, 95% of the people were able to attain the signing skill that was expected of them. So it isn't impossible. This is just a 5-year period. And look at the improvement that happened. Now, how do we create more signing spaces on campus? It's very simple. The math is simple. The more people who sign, the more signing spaces there'll be on campus. And we'll have safe havens for deaf people. They can go into these spaces and feel comfortable. And so let me show you here what happens.
We will have sign in public spaces. Please use whatever skills you have with an ASL, but become comfortable signing in public spaces. We need to have everyone being able to socialize together, work together, whether you're a deaf or hard of hearing faculty or student.
And all of the care people now have been charged again to ensure that there is a communication development plan as part of the plan of work for every faculty member.
I applaud the faculty, staff, the managers who are taking more classes, who are actually going to deaf events and being involved. I love it. If we hire a hearing community member to join the deaf community, they need to learn about us. It's about time. Put yourself in our shoes.
This is still an issue for us.
The area where students are showing up and wanting to have open communication. And so last year when they had the communication forum and protested, we wanted to see the changes occur. We wanted to see respect happening. And our dream is for this issue, just as it says up here, we want it to be an open space area where there's sign, but what are we going to do about it? It's got to be a place where we have value, and with the open forum, we had really good attendance. 100 people attended. The signs are now up. People are out practicing. The chair people have been practicing sign. And the first deaf culture workshop, where we also had 100 faculty, staff, and staff members attend, is a great start. But we had goals established for the faculty and staff for their signing in public spaces, and we have yet to meet them. We made progress, though, but it's not as much progress as I wanted. So today I'm asking you, once again, the faculty members, the staff member, please sign in public spaces. Many of the students here would like to see that. Many of your friends here want to see that. Many of your colleagues want that to happen, and I want that to happen. So please make this happen for us.
I want to thank Dr. Hauser